Academy of Dissident Sciences here on location in Las Vegas. And we'll have the pleasure to present to you the incredible, the unbelievable Chan Johnson. Mr. Chan Johnson is a specialist. He's the wizard of...
Yeah, sure.
Actually, Chan is an unbelievable person. He traveled around the world as an army musician, gathering and collecting information on a lot of spiritual topics. He has a library that would rival the best libraries I've seen in this country in these areas. I was fascinated with the many hours of conversations we had together, and my and two rehearsals where I forgot to turn on the tape recorder, and we had about 1 hour of
I wasn't going to say that.
blank rehearsal. Anyway, the topic of today's tape would be, we will be talking about secret societies in Germany, and we would like to make a point that everything that we were told about German history and politics was a whitewash for the real conspiratorial levels of reality that were going on in World War II Germany. We'll be talking about the German secret societies, the Thule, the Vril, and several others. Then we'll be talking about the interface between these secret societies and certain alien cultures that were working together with the Germans before and during the war. Finally, we will be talking about the interface between these alien cultures and certain celestial level of, should I call it universal management, certain celestial presences on the planet, particularly the Agartha and the Shambhala power centers. And at the end we would cover some struggle between factions of the Celestial Empire, and as they reflect in the overall balance of power before, during, and after the Second World War. So, well, why don't we give the microphone to Chan. Also with us present is Al Bilik, the co-founder of the American Academy of Dissident Sciences. And we are again on location with our garage sale $1.50 microphone and our little bit more expensive video camera of $200. But I decided that it would be a very good point to include Al in this tape, because in our numerous private conversations about his research during the Montauk Project years in the underground bases at Long Island, he encountered a lot of alien races that were working shoulder to shoulder with the government. Actually, his room down there, his office, was next door to the office of the alien boss of the project, which sounded very, very interesting to me. And basically I will be giving a very important input about the interface between the terrestrial secret projects and terrestrial secret societies on the American side of the ocean, with the same aliens that probably were working together with the German secret societies. So here's the microphone to Chan.
Do you have a question, Doctor?
Well, my question is, let's do a little very brief introduction about, well, the differences between what we read in the daily press and the actual reality behind it. How would you try to make a point to our viewers here that basically very little of what happened in Germany happened because of the way it was explained to us in the history textbooks and in the official academic sources?
Well, there's been mountains of books written on the history of World War II. especially on the political issues and the fighting. But until recently, I haven't come across a whole lot that covered the magic. How did they phrase that? The magic politics of Germany. That it was actually an occult political society from one end to the other.
The
This is extremely well.
The magic socialism of Germany.
Yes, that sounds right. We've got some material in books here that I can quote from, but basically my understanding is that Hitler and his henchmen went through a great deal of material, all the way back to Houston Chamberlain, who had written a book about Aryan supremacy and other factors. Let's see, there's a fellow by the name of Alfred Nordenholtz, who wrote something called Scientology, which was a sort of an epistemology. He was trying to bring all these various sciences and disciplines together.
But it has nothing to do with L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology.
No, this was an earlier attempt to do basically what Hubbard did.
Yeah.
Is join a number of disciplines and form some way to free man from that part of his reactive mind that was imprisoning him, keeping him asleep, so to speak. It's amazing, but there are a lot of strange corners these guys went down. There was even a fictional book written by Boyer Lytton called The Coming Race. Now, he was very famous at his time as an author, having written the book The Last Days of Pompeii. But until this German thing came along and Hitler and these guys got interested, not too many people, I don't think, were aware of the book The Coming Race or Zanoni.
Yeah.
And it was about a secret race of super beings who lived inside the earth, and they were able to fly, and they had control of an energy called Vril, V-R-I-L. And the German chaps took this quite seriously. They really believed that there was such a place, and they spent a great deal of time and energy trying to locate an underground area with the supermen. And that was one of the very important contributing factors to Hitler's fantastic socialism.
How about the secret societies? I mean, stories that you have encountered about German secret societies. Different names.
Well, there was
programs.
the Berlin Vril Society and the one in Bavaria, the Thule Gesellschaft, were two of the largest contributors, and I think they brought them together under one banner.
What do you know about these societies?
Only what I have read in this book.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find it.
Because, I mean, in my research of German flying dreadnoughts, I realized that the names they gave to their dreadnoughts are not coincidental. The small 30-feet diameter interceptor fighters were called Vril, which in ancient Germanic language means the life force. And even the sign, the one bolt, not the two lightning bolts of the SS, but the one lightning bolt underneath the craft, is the runic character for, again, the same life force. On the other hand, the larger craft that they built, the tank killers of the Haunibo type, had the electromagnetic-gravitic converters, the so-called tachyon drives. These tachyon drives were called the Thule tachyonators. So we see that these secret names come interwoven even in the hardware, even in the most advanced hardware that was produced by the Third Reich.
Well, the key to this whole thing is a gentleman by the name of Karl Haushofer. And he had a great deal to do with this. He was, I don't know if he was the creator of geopolitics, but he certainly had quite an interest in this. And
geopolitics, one world politics, basically the first swallow of the Bush's New World Order boys.
Yes, well, he was also an initiate, and he was, according to this, it says, by divulging the secret doctrine, Haushofer expanded Hitler's time consciousness and presented to him a global panorama of Earth evolution, tracing the workings of the hierarchies of evil and illustrating the manner in which such powers have opposed the true developments of mankind at every stage in the evolution of human consciousness. Through such instruction, Haushofer awakened Hitler to the real motives of the Luciferic principle, which possessed him so that he could become the conscious vehicle of its evil intent in the 20th century. Now, I had long, for a couple of years anyway, I've held the view that Hitler was actually set up to channel one of these Luciferic entities. If you've ever watched him when he was giving his speech, when he was up there on the platform, he was really into it. It's like he was possessed.
And his eyes were basically as if they were made of glass. I mean,
yeah,
he was in a trance state.
When he was finished, the guy was exhausted. His eyes would glaze over, and he would sort of have to lead him off. But when I got to listening to a lot of these modern channels or mediums that we have bringing all of this knowledge to us, I got the impression that this is exactly what Hitler was, and Himmler was a mule, which meant that most of the time he was sort of dead in the head until some entity came down and took over the body and used it for its own nefarious purposes.
By the way, let's show to our viewers the book that you were reading from. This is The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft. Fascinating book that we will talk about a little bit later on.
It mentions also two secret societies from Tibet, the Luciferic Order and the Ahrimanic Order, from the two deep caves in, I guess, in Tibet, what it says here. And
would this have anything to do with the Shambhala place, with the famous Shambhala place?
Yeah, one was Shambhala and one was Agartha.
So which of the two is the Ahrimanic and which is the Luciferic? It's probably the two sides of the same coin, but just for the sake of mental gymnastics.
The Luciferic oracle was called Agartha and believed to be a center of meditation which concentrated upon giving sustenance to the powers. The Ahrimanic order was named Shambhala, a center where rituals performed to control elemental powers. Now, as I understand it, the Luciferic order agreed to help Nazi Germany, and the other group, the Ahrimanic order, turned away as they were involved with the United States and England. They flatly refused to...
Through the Masonic lodges of these two countries.
Yes.
So basically we see the same pattern here in Germany through the Thule, through the Vril, and maybe even other secret societies that we know nothing about, as is usually the case, because there is always a secret society in the middle of a secret society, again in the middle of another secret society. But we see the same pattern that on both sides of the ocean, and the same is the story with the Russian secret police and their secret societies, according to the book Cosmic Conspiracy by Stan Deo, and many other books about the infiltration of higher orders of beings into the security apparatus of the superpowers.
Well, they didn't come by this knowledge easily. They made annual treks from 1926 to 42 and sought to establish contact with the cave communities and persuade them to enlist the aid of these two orders. So it took them that long to establish contact and get their agreement, and I guess gradually they came to, says here, a Tibetan community was established in Germany with branches in Berlin, Munich, and Nuremberg, but only the adepts of Agartha, the servants of Lucifer, were willing to support the Nazi cause. And a little further down it says, the adepts of Agartha were known in Germany as the Society of Green Men, and strong measures were taken to keep silence about their real significance. And they were also joined by 7 members of the Green Dragon Society of Japan, and somewhere else I read there were more orders involved in this thing. They came from all over the place. And,
all over the globe.
And the SS officer candidates were studying yoga and all sorts of
fascinating story. Tell us the story about the SS men and the apples.
Yeah, there was one reference I read to the fact that this guy would be in his SS uniform sitting there at the desk studying on the significance of half an apple, contemplating to find out what it meant, which is an old Zen Buddhist exercise, of course. But
so basically, the whole philosophy of the Third Reich, the Nazi Party, the elite echelon of the party, the SS, and the topmost part of SS was influenced, was permeated, was basically following by the book these how should they call it? Magic philosophies.
Magic philosophy, and they referred to this particular branch of the Tibetan culture as the Black Monks.
As the Black Monks.
And I believe Hitler had a regular audience with their head astrologer, the guy they called, referred to as the man with the green glove.
Well, the Shambhala place is known to be in two dimensions. The material Shambhala are basically monasteries and caves where initiates, basically it's an invitation-only educational establishment, wherein the chosen ones from around the globe go there, a few people a year, not more than several people a year, to be initiated into the higher secrets of that order. But there is also a supermaterial Shambhala in the higher dimensions where these supermaterial Luciferic beings reside, according to this book here. You mentioned yesterday about Blavatsky's influence and her secret doctrine influence on the establishment of the philosophical doctrine of the Third Reich. There was a brief mentioning in...
My understanding is that Haushofer initiated Hitler into the secret doctrine, that he was quite a proponent of that.
And Blavatsky's secret doctrine.
Yes.
And according to Anthony J. Hilder, he has a friend living in Santa Monica who has on his shelf a leather-bound collected edition of the works of Blavatsky, and the edition is titled The Combined Works of Lucifer. It is also well known that late 19th and early 20th century Blavatsky established the Lucifer Society, which later, for obvious reasons, I mean the name was too obvious, changed its name to the Lucis Trust. And these days it is the Lucis Trust that is the printing outfit of the United Nations. Talking about the, how should I say, the incorporation of a chapel in every major American military establishment or a Navy ship, or even some of the universities have different chapels on their campuses. But I heard that in the United Nations there is a meditation room, so we see here a kind of a quiet movement away from this established tradition. Anyway, back to the Blavatsky's influence.
It's very curious you mentioned that, because I noticed one day when I was out at Nellis Air Force Base Hospital, I was walking down the hall and I came across a room that said meditation room, and I'm going, what the hell is that? I mean, oh, no, it couldn't be.
And we don't have to forget that the land for the United Nations and probably the money for the building was donated to the world by the Rockefeller Foundation. So we know who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. So back to the German secret societies and to the interface of these secret societies with some higher levels of alien and supermaterial beings. Can you tell us about some other sources of reference that you have encountered?
Well, the two of the most common, I guess the most information is Morning of the Magicians, was printed a few years ago.
This is the other way around. The Morning of the Magicians by Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier, if I'm correct about the pronunciation. And the other one is
Spear of Destiny.
the Spear.
The other one is called The Third Reich and the Occult, which deals with the Catharian side. Cathar, would that be the way to pronounce it? Which I believe had its origins in France and with the Teutonic Knights. I understand they had a group called the Ananurbi that traveled all around the world, digging up everything from caves in the southwestern United States to anything they could get their hands on that would give them some insight. Basically, what I've gathered from my studies is that they were looking for a way to bring the Superman, the German soldier statesman, up to a level of Superman, because they wanted to interbreed with these with this new what do they call it? The Untermensch, the guys from out of the earth, and
Untermensch from the inner earth.
The inner earth, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoever was better prepared, they felt, would be the one selected by the Untermensch, the Ariani, I think they refer to them as nowadays.
The Ahnenerbe was the giant German genetic research program. Up to fairly recently, I thought that this was just a simple Mendelian selection program of selecting the best-looking German brides and the most eaglish-looking SS men for arranged marriages on an assembly line through the SS machinery. But it is obviously a lot more than that, up to the point of genetic research institutes in the concentration camp doing horrific genetic experiments. About these expeditions that they did all over the world. For example, I heard that they sent many archaeological expeditions to Tibet from the German universities. I thought so far that it was pure academic interest that sent these expeditions. It's obviously a lot deeper than that. There were major philosophical and religious reasons for trying to establish contact with these supermaterial beings in Shambhala and Agartha. Anyway, the Germans went to the monasteries, brought a lot of writings, copied what they could, translated. There was a major translation effort. Some of the propulsion drives for the German saucers, particularly the spinning mercury balls, I found to be the same as ones found in ancient Indian, basically the Mahabharata sources, the Vimanas of ancient India. There was a major effort of the Germans to incorporate elements of the Eastern cultures and traditions and information. I mean, these caves in Tibet are full to the top of information. The monks can just hardly keep up with it. They are basically preserving it for posterity without being able to go into the voluminous volumes waiting there.
I was just thinking, I was trying to remember there was the name of another fella, Hans Herbiger, with his Welteislehre, his strange
Fire and Ice.
Fire and Ice, yeah, very strange viewpoint of the universe, the universal cosmogony, and I believe this guy was a crazy man. He wanted to push out all Judeo-Christian science, as they called it, and put their magic universe reality in its place.
Well, according to the Harbinson author of the Genesis book, Hans Herbriger is the inspirer of the whole German drive to the South Pole. The fire and ice, the aurora borealis and the eternal ice of the South Pole would toughen the new soul of the new Supermensch. And this was one of the ideological underpinnings for their massive drive in 37, 38, when they started building their underground colony there.
Well, now, where did Herbiger get this from? Did he channel this? Did this come to him? Was it divinely inspired? Because
no idea.
I get the impression the EBEs, the extra systemics, whatever we want to call them, they're giving us all this information now. And I feel that the same information was given to, Herbiger, and he distorted it somehow. It got kind of screwed up someplace because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you look at it in the light that he might have distorted what he was told, then it all makes sense, because now we're getting pretty much the same thing with better channels, better educated channels, and we're getting it straight. I mean, it's just a downpouring of information. We can't assimilate it fast enough, the stuff that's coming in. Not only technological, but social sciences, spiritual sciences. It's amazing. This thing that Hitler wanted for the Germans is coming to pass. I mean, the Greys have been picking up all these people, right? Been doing biogenetic experiments with them. But they select the ones they want. And they're selected ahead. And according to several points of view, like from the Bashar characters, the Sasani, now they claim, this guy over here, they claim that they are the human race 300 years in the future, that this is what we're going to look like. So I got to thinking the other day, you know, maybe Hitler's dream has become realized. But they didn't pick just the Germans, they picked all over the globe, they picked the people they wanted.
Well, probably the Germans were the small model for this genetic mutation. The 1,000-year Reich of Germany is probably the same thing as the 1,000 points of light George Bush was talking about in the New World Order. According again to Anthony Hilder, who brought us the brilliant LP trilogy Illuminati CFR about 15 years ago, Hitler wrote a second book, which you've probably guessed it correctly. The title of his second book, after the Mein Kampf book, the title of the second book is The New World Order. I have a feeling that all throughout the last 1 century, the Illuminati have been trying over and over again, under different colors of the skin, basically the same idea, the same principle, to create a brave new world order with the communists of the First International of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels about 100 years ago, with the Bolsheviks of Lenin's revolution, then with the fascists in Italy, with the Nazis in Germany, with the communists of Eastern Europe and Russia after the war, and finally with the New World Order boys of George Bush. This is the same idea over and over again, covered up behind different names in different nations. Not only the political structure of society, but also the coming under the surface projects for genetic manipulation, genetic upbringing of the human race, upgrading of the human race. And I don't think that what happened in Germany is an isolated phenomena, and I don't think one iota in these constant rattlings about the threat from a Fourth Reich reoccupying the world, of the Fourth Reich penetrating the CIA. It's not that the Fourth Reich penetrated the CIA, it's simply that the highest echelons of the CIA have always been the best colleagues of the highest echelons of the Gestapo and the SS during the war. I mean, CIA was not created during the war, but the highest echelons of the American secret societies, of the Illuminati and beyond and above them, have been in the best of cooperations with the highest echelons of the Nazis and the Russians after the Cold War started. So back to these secret societies and the alien cultures. Any other references that you might have gotten about alien cultures taking part in this process? I also remember that we talked about Hitler. What were his ideas about the new race? If you can remember these references that we were talking about.
If I can remember.
Because obviously this process goes on in the four corners of the globe. These are not isolated phenomena. All throughout centuries, secret religious cults, secret societies, hermetic schools of thought have been quietly in contact and cooperation, basically under the tutelage of subcontracting alien races, subcontracting for even higher levels of celestial management structures. And very often the seeming struggle between the different factions is just the built-in gradient of difficulty, but basically the two factions serve the same ends. It was not the communists and the Nazis battling each other in the Second World War, as Anthony Hilder calls them, the communazis. It's basically the left hand of this secret terrestrial government, global government, battling the right hand, battling in quotes. And through this quote battle, they were furthering the interests of the secret illuminated elite.
Well, down through the ages, I suppose, with all these various secret societies, such as the Golden Dawn, there's been talk about meetings with demons, because, you know, this was a very superstitious age in the 1700s, 1800s. The science hadn't quite come in real strong yet. And, well, for example, there was a fellow, Samuel Mathers, who was the founder of the Golden Dawn. And he claimed to have had communication with these unknown supermen and to have established contact with them. And he wrote it in his manifesto addressed to the members of the secret order in 1896, which is quite revealing, because demons or spacemen or guys from under the earth, I mean, you know, there was somebody there that they communicated with that grabbed their attention. I mean, they were very impressed with them, evidently. They must have had powers that man doesn't possess.
Well, obviously, man, this is the part of the game. Actually, this is how the game is played. You materialize down among the Earthlings, do a few tricks, and they would follow you till the end of their lives.
Well, there was a fellow Rauschning, who was the mayor of Danzig, who was quite close to Hitler, I guess, in the 20s before he came to power. And Hitler had met a lot of influential people with money. And one of them that he confided in was this fellow Rauschning, who must have had an awfully good memory or rust to put down in his diary what Hitler said, because he said some, for the 19 and 20s, some pretty alarming things that could have easily been misinterpreted. And one thing I recall here was a quote where he said, Hitler told him, says, "The new man is living amongst us now. He is here," almost triumphantly. And he says, "Isn't that enough for you?" He says, "I will tell you a secret. I have seen the new man. He is intrepid and cruel. I was afraid of him." And uttering these words, added Rauschning, Hitler was trembling in a kind of ecstasy. And then he related another story, which was told to him by a Dr. Achille Delmas, who was a specialist in applied philosophy. And this is pretty amazing if you consider it. This is a person close to Hitler told me that he wakes up in the night screaming and in convulsions. He calls for help and appears to be half paralyzed. He is seized with a panic that makes him tremble until the bed shakes. He utters confused and unintelligible sounds, gasping as if on the point of suffocation. The same person described to me one of these fits with details that I would refuse to believe had I not complete confidence in my informant. He says Hitler was standing up in the room, swaying and looking all around him as if he were lost. It's he, he groaned. "He's come for me." His lips were white. He was sweating profusely. Suddenly he uttered a string of meaningless figures, then words, and then scraps of sentences. It was terrifying. He used strange expressions strung together in bizarre disorder. Then he relapsed again into silence, but his lips still continued to move. He was then given a friction and something to drink. Then suddenly he screamed, there, over in the corner, he is there," all the time stamping with his feet and shouting. To quieten him, he was assured that nothing extraordinary had happened, and finally he was gradually calmed down. After that he slept for a long time and became normal again. Now that's pretty wild. I mean, you read all the stories about Hitler, how controlled he could be, or at other times dramatic, and then flying into demonic rages. It's kind of unusual.
Well, for anyone who has seen documentary films about channeling, about how should I say, possession of one being by another, and also programs on abduction. Oh, I mean, these are so common signs of one being trying to enter into the other, simply working out the the formula for controlling the other being. We were talking yesterday about a particular personality that may have been channeling directly through Hitler, one of the splinter groups of the aliens that have been here under the planet, under the Giza pyramid.
That was in the Billy Myers notes, the last two books, Messages from the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure who was talking to Billy, if it was one of the men or Semyazi, but basically what came out of it was there's a group that lives beneath the pyramid of Giza.
They asked Billy Meyer what does he know about the Thule Society. Probably they wanted to see whether the Thule Society was associated with the Pleiadians or what.
Okay.
And then the Pleiadians started searching their databases, and they couldn't discover. They asked him for a particular name, I think.
Ashtar.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked Billy to ask Semyazi who was Ashtar, because this Ashtar fella crept up through some channeling sessions.
And Ashtar Command has been claiming that they are also Pleiadians, and they are here to evacuate the planet and so on. I mean, it's very well known in a lot of publications in the last 10 years.
Somewhere I have a slip of paper with the first, I think through radio, he made a comment, and I've got that. I have to dig it out, where he announced himself to the world. But getting back to this other story, Billy had wanted to know who Ashtar was, and I think Semyazi said that they couldn't find any trail the guy had left, but they'd check into it. So sometime later, she came back, and the question came up again, and she said, yes, we located Ashtar. At first they said the trail only led to the Thule Society in Germany, and that's as much as they had gotten. They found out that the guy's actual name, symbol, was Ruziak, and then he was related to a fellow named Kamagol, who was
Kamagol.
Kamagol, Kamagol the second, I believe they referred to him.
Ruziak was an Earthling, a member of the Thule Society.
No.
Or a super material being.
The group that lived under the pyramid, he was a part of that. And he was a cousin to the leader, and evidently his project was Nazi Germany or something of this sort. He had a change of heart, and I guess he decided to pull away from that and form this group. And when he did, he took some of his cohorts with him, and he called himself Ashtar.
The Ashtar Command. I've been talking about these Giza intelligences as the arch enemies of the Pleiadians. At the beginning, I thought that these are the little greys. But it turns out that they themselves, the Giza intelligences, are a faction of the Pleiadians that came here in the 30s, built or activated an ancient complex under the Cheops pyramid, and started influencing terrestrial history from there. So here we come again to a very direct interface between the Thule Society and alien beings, but not of the high angelic or celestial level. The Giza intelligences are as material as probably the Pleiadians. They are plus minus few steps of evolution, but basically in the same mortal in the flesh stage of development. I remember also in the fascinating book Cosmic Conspiracy, where Standeo talks about the FBI boss Hoover trying to pinpoint the 10 members of the Illuminati Politburo. And they pinpointed 8 of them, but the other 2, and literally these are the words in the text, they were bordering on the paranormal. And it's not bordering, but they were paranormal. Probably these were either alien beings from a resident faction here on the planet that were beaming down and then up for the session. So they couldn't trace anybody living in and out of the building, but instead of 8, they had 10 people for every sitting. Or they may have even been some super material beings of the angelic order that simply materialized for the session and then dematerialize. So, I mean, we see the same pattern over and over and over again. So back to Ashtar and to Aruziak and Kamago. What happened later?
What happened? It gets a little confusing. I understand that the Pleiadians, the White Brotherhood, had originally set up Hitler, and he had offered to fight for the good cause, to bring the Aryan people back again, to get rid of some of the people on the planet, to bring the population down to manageable levels. Mm-hmm. And then, according to Billy Meyer's Pleiadians, what they told Billy was that Hitler and some of his top leaders were influenced by the B'Phath in a negative way, and the whole program was screwed
You
up.
mentioned B'Phath here. What does B'Phath mean?
According to Billy Myers, that was the name of the Giza intelligence. It was called the B'Phath. And the only reference I could find to that, there was an earlier group called the French BAABI or something like that, a group of people that came a long time ago from Proxima Centauri. They had splintered off of their planet. Planetary culture, no longer believing in the aims and goals of that culture. And they came to Mars and had sexual intercourse with some little mongoloid-looking creatures there. And they became the later Tibetans. They settled in Tibet and in Lebanon. And these were possibly, one faction of the Nephilim. But they said they've been around here for a long time, trying to influence the leaders of men. And it sounds similar to the B'Phath, but I don't know if it's the same groups or not. But they seem to have similar intents. And you mentioned Antarctica. There's another thing that popped up in the book by Elizabeth Clara.
What is it?
Beyond the Light Barrier.
Beyond the Light Barrier.
Yeah, they claim that they had originally lived on Earth, on the Antarctic continent, before it froze over.
When you said they, who are these they?
These were the people from Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, the Alpha Centauri.
And they've been visiting here in recent times, and they're sort of like, they look very much like us. And some of them are tall and blonde and Nordic and Aryan looking in appearance. And they claim that they had an ancient base down there where the Germans discovered the Schirmacher Seengruppe, the colored lakes.
The Schirmacher Lakes in Neuschwabenland in Antarctica, south of South Africa, present-day South Africa.
And then during the Antarctic expedition of 37 and 38, that's exactly where the flying boats landed and found that tunnel in the ground and the caves under the earth. There was a fissure, and they lowered a guy down in a boatswain's chair with a camera, the photographer from the expedition. And I guess he didn't have a flash, but he was trying to take pictures. But I assumed that later on they went back and went into those caves. I mean, it was just too good an opportunity to pass up, to explore, to see what was down there. Hitler and his followers had a kind of an interest in a place where they could get away from it all and do their own thing without neighboring countries prying into their business. And they had selected Antarctica because it was totally isolated, difficult to get into. And I think from that film, that Navy film on one of your tapes, it's about Antarctica.
Yeah, one of the tapes, basically, is it a Nazi colony on the South Pole of 2 million people called New Berlin, or is it the Hollow Earth people flying their saucers from the South Pole? We have this official Navy documentary, 1-hour documentary in color about Admiral Byrd's expedition to the South Pole, where they discovered the never-freezing lakes that nobody of us has been told in school, mountains of coal that would immediately solve, according to the text in the film, the energy problem for the next several centuries. And many other interesting things that are visible in the film.
I was amazed when I watched that film. I mean, here we are in this DC-3, looking out the window, flying over the Antarctic, and there's ice and snow everywhere. And then you come to this one area, it kind of creeps up on the edge of the film. It's chocolate brown in color, mountains with lakes, And they said it was 300 miles square. I mean, how could have anybody have missed that before? I mean, he had flown down there before, you know, over the South Pole.
Oh, I mean, Admiral Byrd was 2 times before the Second World War, in the late 20s, then the late 30s in 37, and then when he went down chasing the Germans, he went for the 3rd time in 47. I want to make a little remark here about the German fascinations with the 2 polarities of our planet, the 2 polar regions. A story that I heard, and I repeat again, a lot of these things are either quotations from books that, well, we cannot verify because we've never been there at these places, or just anthropological collections of rumors and stories. But the story that I heard about the Thule, where did the name Thule came from? I mean, the Thule is also that city in Greenland called Thule. The story is that there was a civilization in Greenland a long time ago, before Greenland fell under the ice. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed Nordic type people that later on moved up north, further up north, and eventually went into the inner earth. People that were racially, well, brothers to the Germans, but because of their much faster advancement in the inner earth, the Germans felt kind of a longing to reunite with their more advanced brothers and basically to shortcut the evolutionary process. So in the late 30s they equipped a special submarine, according to information from a psychic that I have, that I've been talking to. And the submarine reached the opening of the inner earth, on the sea opening to the inner earth, and they started, well, digging in, but they encountered a very strong cross current. Didn't want to submerge, not knowing what the depth was, and eventually they realized that they cannot proceed anymore. Possibly these are strong energy fields that guard the openings of the inner earth. Later on, in 42 or 43, they equipped an anti-gravity cigar-shaped device piloted by 2 people, 2 pilots, and were able successfully to penetrate the south polar opening to the inner earth, the land opening to the inner earth. And of course, probably they were allowed by the inner earthlings to get in, and they landed there and established some contact. Another rumor recently that I heard is actually the city New Berlin is not as much in the underground of the South Pole, but inside the inner earth itself. It's not an underground city, but it's a normal city with, according to stories from the inner earth, there are trees and rivers and basically everything that we have here. It is down there. As we know from many other sources, the earth is a multi-dimensional reality. There are other realities and other civilizations living on this planet, just few split seconds forward or backward in time. Billy Meyer has been talking about a race of 1 feet tall small creatures, and he even produced the footprints of these creatures at the local conference here, that live in another dimension. Stories about the Gulliverian travels in the Lilliputian land may be very true. Maybe someone was taken to the Lilliputian land and shown, just for the purpose of education of our race. We cannot cross from our reality into theirs, into their dimension, but these little creatures have the ability to come into our reality. So immediately all these folk stories about the little people, about the forest people and so on, may be all true. And not only this reality of small people, but I've heard also stories of other reality that has a peaceful society with earthlings like we are anatomically, but on a socio-cultural level of basically 16th century peaceful medieval community without any wars. So parallel to these stories, I mean, many Indian legends talk of several earths moving together in a package in different realities. The Waspi Bible talks about the multiple Jehovian realities of existence above the surface of the earth. Maybe in analogy to that, there are other realities below the surface of the earth in different vibrations. So it is not that easy to basically discard all of these stories.
Well, now, I've been pretty open-minded about this UFO thing, but little fairies, no, I kind of draw the line. I refuse to believe in fairies. I read parts of Jacques Vallée's book, Dimensions, and that certainly was an interesting viewpoint about that. There may be something to it. There was supposed to have been a race of dwarves that lived under England that created these. They were quite advanced in metallurgy, and they had created these beautiful swords with holes in them that would sing when you would swing them through the air. And they had caches of gold and everything, which William the Conqueror supposedly double-crossed them and took the gold and sealed up their little kingdom down there. But it was unearthed in recent times under this Englishman's estate. They actually found records written in ancient Norwegian that this was the case, that had actually occurred.
Well, I talking to a psychic about a year ago. I asked her how many intelligent races or civilizations or groups, I mean types of beings, do live in our solar system, on the 12 planets of our solar system. I know from other sources that all of them, and probably most, if not all of the moons, are populated, including bases on Mercury. The polar regions of Mercury are not that hot at all. Even our government has a base there. And I was told that there are 1,200 different types of intelligent beings living in the solar system, which puts way above, I mean, even the wildest imagination and all the crazy stories that we can put together, from tabloids, from the folklore. Even they won't be enough to foot the bill. So probably the universal reality is way more complex than we can even imagine. Anyway, let's go back to the interface between, I mean, back to the magical socialism. Al, I would like to give us some thought from your kind of an engineering background about, have you had any stories of contacts between the Germans and some alien races?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
He was meditating. He wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
Meditating.
Give us a quick overlook of everything that we talked about until this time. Basically, what are your feelings on that?
Well, I agree with you about the German societies, the secretness of the German Nazi society, the fact that it was magically based in many respects, that the entire SS operation was a religious order, really, rather than a military order. They had ranks within it, which were actually positions in terms of a religious hierarchy, and they used those ranks to determine the levels of people in terms of their positions, however they determined them. It was not a political disposition in the SS. It was religious metaphysical. And this fact has been lost to historians almost entirely. Trevor Ravenscroft is one of the few in recent years who has come up with the correct analysis on this. Of course, he was English, and his background is very curious. He met, during the period prior to World War II, the man who had been Hitler's right-hand man advisor up until the time when this other gentleman, whose name now escapes me, decided that he had had enough of Hitler and his regime and knew where it was going and wanted out, and fled to England before the war started. After the war was over and Hitler was allegedly dead, he and Ravenscroft met, and he said, "Someday I will tell you the real story of the Third Reich." And Ravenscroft, of course, was very interested. But he did not get anything more than little pieces and anecdotes from this man throughout the years, until the time when this man, who had been Hitler's right-hand man, decided things had changed in world history, and would now be the time to tell the story.
This is supposedly the
Walter Johannes Stein was the guy.
Walter Stein, yes. He says to Mr. Ravenscroft, okay, now's the time, I'm going to tell you the whole story. And 3 days later he dropped dead of a heart attack before he ever uttered a single word, other than the notes which Ravenscroft had mentally made over the years of talking with this man, which was sort of beating around the bush of the subject, and he never got to the heart of it. So it's very interesting that there were a few people who knew the real facts inside as to what was going on in the Third Reich. Among other people who knew the facts, of course, was Winston Churchill, who had his own battery of astrologers, if you will, who was trying to outmaneuver Hitler because Hitler made all of his moves based on astrology. And this was another interesting point in that there was a psychological, an astrological war going on as well as a military war.
So this is astrological socialism on top of
Right. Right. I'm sure none of the foot soldiers knew anything about what was going on. But Herr Himmler undoubtedly did and was right in the middle of it. It is interesting because here was Hitler, who was the head of a very powerful nation, and who was very thoroughly steeped in magic and symbolic magic and, of course, other aspects of magic under basically the Luciferian group. And here he was fighting another group, his arch enemies, of course, being, as he called it, the Jewish group. He never said the Jewish people, but the Jewish hierarchy, the Zionists, really. And they, of course, had come under the sway long ago, if you look at this from a magical viewpoint, under the sway of Ahriman and the Ahrimanic order. So we had two groups, the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, literally fighting a war on the physical level here on Earth as we know it. And these two groups were manipulating vast, powerful operations. And they probably were conducting their own operations in another level, in another area, if you will. Another reality might be the right term, but certainly not at the physical level so far as they, the leaders, were concerned.
The Luciferic and the Ahrimanic orders of beings, these are super-material,
Yes.
basically angelic level beings with spirit bodies, energy bodies that do not live in our dimension. They can materialize in our reality, but normally they reside elsewhere. So in order to better interface with the material beings of our reality, these spiritual beings would very often subcontract other alien races that are also material but are higher developed than we are and can more easily contact with the spiritual beings. So that's why we always have this pyramid of celestial beings on the top, regardless of whether they are Luciferian or Trinitarian or Ahrimanic
Or whatever.
Then the subcontracting levels, multi-tiered levels of aliens, different levels of development, and finally there are the secret societies on Earth,
down at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak.
absolutely to the bottom of the pyramid.
And then under them, of course, the grounded Earth, where all of the foot soldiers, the warriors, and the war makers, and the munitions makers, and the politicians, and everyone else fight it out.
There was a Canadian fellow a few years ago that mentioned who the two races were in conflict. One was called the Psychians, that came from a star system called On.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the guy's name, but he said he had an actual, wasn't an out-of-the-body thing, but he had actually was taken to the realms of the blonde Psychians. And the other group, the evil group, the negative group, service to self, came from Ursa Major, and they had a base or something in Draco, Draconis. Yeah, it's not too far from here, and they have a temporary base in the system on or near Pluto. And he even gave the names for the two different groups. Boy, I'll have to dig out that reference. I thought the writing, I didn't like the writing style, so I kind of doubted the story, but it's interesting that he did mention the two groups were manipulating the groups here, or augmenting them, or something of the sort, but they have been in conflict now. As the Tunguska story came about in this way, according to this fella. The dark forces were on their way in here into the heart Chakra, which would be above the Gobi Desert, with an armada, and they were going to invade Earth. Was it around 1908 that this thing hit?
1906.
June 30th.
Yeah.
And it gets really wild now. There was a Japanese prince. I guess the Japanese were in on this thing, who were representing the blonde guys, the Psychians on Earth. And he was in a small scout craft, and he was on his way out through the vortex when he saw this big mother of a ship coming in through the vortex. So he did what any red-blooded Japanese samurai warrior would do. He ran his ship straight into the engine in the center, and blew it up.
The big ship.
The big ship. So it came down.
So the big fat mama crashed.
Well, it wandered around for a while. It drifted around, trying to regain height, so it could go back out the vortex and warn the rest of the invasion fleet to buck up that there was trouble brewing or something. And it wandered erratically, and it was seen by the natives and recorded, evidently. And finally, when they couldn't raise it anymore, I guess they had a bunch of guys asleep in there that were still in stasis. Anyway, when they couldn't raise the ship, they decided to abandon it, and they blew it up over Tunguska. And this was what the Tunguska explosion supposedly was all about. Now, where did all these souls go, I wonder, from this group, from Ursa Major, these warlike, bellicose beings? I wonder if they ended up in the area of Japan and Germany.
Well,
the later invaders, because, listen, Nazi Germany should have never have happened. Time was out of kilter there, I feel. Something had happened to time, and these guys appeared out of nowhere, probably in the wrong time. I think this was about 2,000 years late. I think they were 2,000 years late on the time scale coming in here. It was supposed to be an earlier invasion. Instead, they ended up in the 19th century and got things all screwed up.
I mean, according to Billy Meyer, wherever you crash your ship, your soul remains to reincarnate on that planet. You won't be moved through the back circuits, to the back tunnels of the supermaterial universe back to your original soul. I mean, or if you remain in another time zone, then you have to reincarnate in that time zone if your ship crashes there. So if aliens crash on our planet or are expelled from the ships as basically convicts in Australia, on a prison planet, their souls cannot return and reincarnate on their original planet or on other planet by choice. They remain on our planet. I mean, that's well known from many other sources.
The implants given them.
Not only the implants, no. The soul universe operates under these principles. On whatever planet you are, you recycle on that planet. They won't take you for a ride to another planet. It's not built into that universe. You can do that only by ship basically in the body form.
What I mean is, if Orion warriors are sent to this planet for a mission, and should their ship get blown up and their souls unable to escape back to their own place in the actuality of the universal quadrant, wherever they came from, they are implanted so that they're born into bodies here. They won't give the secret away. The secret must be maintained. That these godlings are playing chess with man. The one inviolate law that must never be broken is the law of confusion, that we don't find out. Because if we're pieces in the game and we find out, then we can become players.
Absolutely. I have a question for Al here. Al, in your works on the Philadelphia project and the Montauk project and many other secret projects on Long Island and in the secret base there, I mean, there were many Germans that were working with you. Did you ever did you have any gut feeling about these goings on in Nazi Germany? I mean, all this occult stuff, and we were talking yesterday here with Chan that when the Nuremberg guys realized really what the Third Reich was about, I mean, they were so appalled that none of this was entered into the paperwork. I mean, all this occult and psychic and astrological and perverse face of the Third Reich disappeared. Chan was saying yesterday that the Eagle's Nest villa of Hitler, when they entered there, they found paintings that would make you vomit. I mean, these were paintings of every imaginable sexual act with everything imaginable and unimaginable that moves on this planet. I wouldn't be amazed if there were paintings of other perversities, even of satanic type, because my practice has told me that very often such sexual perversions very often gravitate toward ritual ceremonies and little by little sacrifices of a more and more serious nature. So how were the German scientists behaving? Did you notice any longing in them for secret rituals and stuff while they were working on the project?
No, I never saw anything like that or sensed anything like that. The man who headed up the Phoenix Project, Dr. Hermann C. Unterman, was a very rigid, straight type German, and he escaped from Germany in 1938 because he couldn't take the Nazi order. After he graduated from the university in 36 and had his PhD in physics, he was inducted, you might say, into the Nazi order. He didn't say no. You don't really say no in those days in Germany. They said, we want you in the party, and you're a member of the Nazi party now? And you say, yes, sir. And he did, and after a year and a half of it, he had enough. He wanted out, and he was smuggled out of Nazi Germany under the noses of the hierarchy by, of all people, my father, who was apparently developing some expertise in the way of smuggling out German scientists, mostly Jewish. Unterman, I believe, was not. And
oh, your father was the major paper clipper in this country.
He was. He was the man who smuggled out 9 Jewish and German scientists from Nazi Germany into the United States via the company store, meaning not the CIA company, but literally the company store which the family owned, which was the I can remember the name of it now. It's only a family name. They smuggled them in through the very interesting artifice of the old shipping crates, which were used in those days on the ocean liners, usually 12 feet square, a 12-foot cube, and it was large enough you could put a false room in it, provide light, air, water, food, facilities that were necessary, and air hole, if you will, an air tube to the outside of this cube, and the person would be put in there and nailed inside of it and would ride across the Atlantic on an ocean liner with this particular cube. They'd be very careful to put on top, not on the bottom. And when he arrived in New York, at the ship side, the dock side, the crate would be transferred to the family store and be uncrated inside the store.
Oh, fascinating. I mean,
we had full verification of this. And this man then, or whoever it was, would be then transferred to the family mansion on Long Island and West Islip. And the company store, Arnold Constable and Company, was used for this process on a regular basis. And the story was among the family that ADL, Anti-Defamation League, had an office on the top floor of this store in Brooklyn. So they were involved with this thing, yet my father was not Jewish in any way.
Defamation League was on the top floor of your father's store?
And on the top floor of the family department store, Arnold and Constable. Now, the history of the store and the family is rather obscure, but we do know that Arnold was an Englishman who came over from about 1855 from England, started a department store chain in New York, which was most successful, and after a number of years he invited his old friend, and it was a friend, not a family relationship, by the name of Constable, to come over and work with him in the family store, in the chain, and they built a chain of stores in the New York area. They were very well off, very wealthy. And the connection with our family began sometime around the latter part of the 19th century, when Auntie Arnold, whose original name was Cameron, in a double wedding ceremony, she and one of the other people in the island married the Arnolds, a son and a daughter. It was not, of course, the original Arnolds. And in the double ceremony, she became an Arnold, and father, when he was raised by Auntie Arnold, because of the fact that his father died, that is Edward Cameron, when he was about 5 years old from a gunshot wound in the home. Nobody knows for sure to this day whether it was an accident or a deliberate. Anyway, he was raised by Auntie Arnold. And in some manner, he became heir to all of this. He adopted the name Arnold. He did not legally change it. I've checked this.
So basically your father has been associated for all these years, from my viewpoint, with secret operations run by the Navy, run by...
Absolutely correct.
By the government, basically as a private outfit. What the Wackenhut company does these days for guarding certain installations, and many other companies provide similar
Yeah,
services
we've
in
never-
the other fields. Obviously, this has been a tradition, a long tradition here.
I don't know the history. No one in the family seems to know fully the history. We don't even have the records of when he went in the Navy or how he came out, other than the fact that the town historian in Islip Bayshore area knows that he did leave the Navy in December of 1929 with a heart condition. He was mustered out and given a pension, and he never worked a day in his life again. He did have a heart problem.
So back to the, to the Germans that were working on these projects, because my feeling is that basically half of the scientists, maybe 2/3 of the scientists in these super advanced projects here in the United States were Germans.
Probably true. We know this to be the case insofar as both the Philadelphia experiment is concerned and many other projects that followed on. If you remember...
Have you ever had conversations with them about particular philosophies, about were they strong into some philosophy? Because here we are talking about the Germany being basically
well, here's
Germany.
Here's the problem in trying to track that down. When I was living as under my original family name, and the real name of Edward Cameron, and was part of that project, and before I became part of that project, of course, and was just running around with the family and seeing Father once a year at Christmas and so forth, and I was going to school, I was not interested in any way in metaphysics or any of the secret society stuff or anything of this nature. I was just a happy-go-lucky guy who, along with my brother, were going through college and getting our education, and when we joined the Navy, but Father's insistence in September of 1939, we still maintained that status, and we went in the Navy because we were asked to, and we became part of the project. And of course, off hours before the war started, we were out chasing women all over the place. I mean, we set records among ourselves as to how many we could chase. We followed in Father's footsteps in many ways. He was quite a skirt chaser himself. He had 6 wives. And nobody knows how many sons and daughters by illegitimate operations, you might say. So we are still, the legends still run in the family, the cousins now, and the offspring of Father's exploits. But the unknown side of Father was that he made connections with intelligence, and he smuggled these people over, and we don't know how he made these connections. We know he knew people in Europe, because in the Navy he undoubtedly went to Europe.
Was he a member of secret societies, Masonic or other?
We have no knowledge whatever that he was a member of any society or group, and I don't think to this day anybody in the family knows whether or not he was connected with the Masonic order. This would be a good starting point.
Yeah.
This has not yet been researched by me because my time back east is limited, and my, shall I say, ability to talk with the known family members of the cousins and so forth. I have never talked with them about this subject because up to the last time when I saw them, I, as Al Bielik, was not considered a member of the Cameron clan. But my brother has finally broached it to them that I am a member of the clan, and it's caused no little disturbance. Any case, something like that. Well, there's no family fortune left. That disappeared.
So, I mean, let's go back to the occult, to the mystical.
See, my interest in metaphysics stems from Al Bielik, roughly from the age of 5. And I had no knowledge at the time, and was Ed Cameron, that Dr. von Neumann, for example, or any of these other people had any such unusual connections. Now, most of these people were brought over. They became not part of the Philadelphia experiment. Von Neumann came over on his own in 1930, as did some of the other members of the staff at the Institute. And it is very possible some of them were members of some such secret orders or had connections in some way, but we don't know this. Another man who you would have to look at as being a potential member of such secret orders was, of course, the man who developed the atomic bomb later, and that was Dr. Oppenheimer, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who von Neumann knew very well. Oppenheimer had some strange ideas and strange connections, and of course, he was accused in the mid-50s or early 50s of being a communist or a very strong communist party sympathizer. Without getting into the politics here, he undoubtedly had some strange connections in Germany, because he is also from Germany and left there and came to the United States about 1930, as did a whole group. Well, what the connections were here, I never had an interest in. And this is the problem trying to trace it now. I know that there is a large group of German scientists connected with the Philadelphia experiment, not the later ones brought over by Father, but the earlier ones that came over, and Unterman was not even connected with the Philadelphia experiment because he was not a citizen. Unterman, right.
Yeah.
He was here in those years, a new father, knew him quite well. But those who became part of the project were already here, either normal Americans by birth, or they were naturalized citizens like Tesla much further back, or von Neumann, who was a naturalized citizen also. And these people became part of the project. Their history, I don't know, but it was mostly Germans. It's quite correct. Now, in terms of the Phoenix Project, there are even more Germans involved. And that Phoenix Project, the essence of the Nazi connection became more obvious, because there we had all of these former German scientists, many Jewish, some not, who became part of the Phoenix Project, and the money was provided from the old Reichsbank funds, which had been lost in Germany in 1944 in a railroad car crash.
Well, where I'm driving at is, so much hardware and science was incorporated from Germany.
Yes.
Wasn't there any attempt to incorporate also all these mystical and magical and philosophical structures that existed in Germany? In the secretive levels of these highest scientific echelons that they've been working with?
Well, I'll have to put it this way. I saw no evidence of it as Albielek, and as Albielek I was very much in metaphysics in the project. Now, there was a very heavy metaphysical aspect to the project, meaning the Phoenix Project, involving the use of psychics and so forth. But I did not see evidence of a hierarchical connection involving any secret societies. That could have been there, but if it was extremely well concealed.
It always is.
Right. And if that would be strange that would be there, and I would not be knowledgeable about it because I was the psychic director of many areas of the Phoenix Project. Duncan was heavily involved in that aspect of it. Father, of course, was in the background. He knew all about the project. He died in 1981 before the project crashed. And his connections with Unterman are well known, but what other connections existed, there is still no evidence of or data of. The connection with the, shall we say, the metaphysical and mystical side took place from an off-planet connection, because a large part of this project was run by aliens, and they were the reptilians. Again, back to the Orion complex, and of course the Draconians, who were the 7-foot Draconian reptilians, the so-called royalty of the reptilians, if you want to use that term. They had very strong and heavy metaphysical connections with all kinds of things, as well as their direct physical connection. And the metaphysical scientific knowledge they had, speaking of both as a unit, was used to manipulate humans, human souls, and do things of this nature. They knew exactly how to do it. They taught our government, the United States government, in terms of the secret intelligence operation, CIA, NSA, et al., how to do these things.
This is fascinating. Let's backtrack a few steps a little bit, because I remember discussing with you many times before possible connections in Nazi Germany between the Nazis and other alien races. Do you have any knowledge to that end?
Yes. Very definitely there was a connection. Now, if you go back into the history of alien contact on this planet, there is a history which I fell heir to. In fact, somebody gave it to me, which is, of course, an outline and not the full history. The earliest concern with alien contact with Earth that came to the notice of a government administration was under the Grover Cleveland administration in the United States in 1887. And about the same time the British became aware of this, formed their own research group, and the two merged in 1897. And they set up research facilities in secret, very much in secret, of course, to examine alien visitations to the Earth and what it might mean, and of course the fact that they knew at that time, not in large numbers were the aliens here then, but they were here.
1897, the first SETI program, secret government program, 1897, almost 100 years ago.
That's right. It's actually 1887 was when it began, and it was 1897 the British and American operations joined. Now, you go on, without going through the whole chronology, because I don't have it in front of me, In the early 30s, when Roosevelt became president, he became concerned with this problem. And he, of course, with his connections and knowledge derived from Tesla, because Tesla was a very good friend of his, and he called Tesla down to Washington about 1933 and asked him what he was doing. And of course, he knew about the project, the then ongoing Project Invisibility. He also knew that Tesla was a man who had been heavily involved with, as Tesla admitted, in alien communications for his radio equipment, which he had built through his connections with RCA. He designed all of the super-sensitive RCA receivers for overseas communications. That is, Tesla did, and RCA built them. Transmitters, Tesla was not interested in. They were off the shelf, so to speak, and were readily available. But in any case, discussions with Roosevelt centered around the fact that Tesla had been communicating with alien races, and Roosevelt was very interested in it. He was into metaphysics, and most people don't know this. And he wanted to talk with some of these aliens. And Tesla arranged it. And the talk got down to the point where Roosevelt wanted to meet some of them. And this was again arranged partly through Tesla, but also, unknown to me until very recently, Roosevelt already had connections established with these secret research groups involving the aliens, and they met with the aliens down in, of all places, Panama, in the mountain ranges. And a base was set up there, and later on was agreed to set up bases for the alien operations under Roosevelt's regime, before the agreement that was made later when the mass invasion came in the early 50s, when Eisenhower made another agreement, a follow-on agreement. Roosevelt made contact with these aliens. Tesla recommended that he deal with the Pleiadians, as he considered them honorable, but he said there are other groups I've talked with. Roosevelt insisted on talking with at least one other, so Tesla recommended the K group, the Kondrashkin, who now, from my analysis, turn out to be the Blue Grays, who were known by apparently several names. So he made his meeting with both, first the Pleiadians, secondly the Kondrashkin, and he made the agreement with the Kondrashkin. The Pleiadians were rejected at that time. They knew at that point, from their own knowledge and their own ability to time travel, that the die was cast. There would be a world war in the near future involving most of the countries on Earth between the United States and Germany. The Pleiadians were rejected by Roosevelt, then went to Nazi Germany, approached Hitler, and said, there's going to be a war. So I'm paraphrasing, of course. I don't know the exact words and what happened. Saying, in essence, there's going to be a war in the future. We are concerned about the survival of the Aryan people whom we have helped to create genetically on this planet. You are just championing the Aryan race and their survival and so forth. He says, we will help you technically because you're going to lose the war otherwise. And we don't want to see all these Aryans killed. So we will give you technical help and assistance. And so Hitler says, sure. Well, what do you want? And he says, we want very little. Actually, all we want is to see that in your handling of the racial problems in Germany that you go easy and take it easy in terms of dealing with the Jewish problem. He says, we know you got a problem in terms of the politics and all of the things we're involved without getting involved in this whole thing. Hands off of any rough stuff in terms of the Jewish people. Hitler, Eva Braun, and Himmler all agreed, and there was originally a three-part agreement just for those three and, of course, the Pleiadians. So the Pleiadians arranged to crash a ship, which was done in the Bavarian Mountains in late 1935. And it was intended. It was an engineered crash. The ship was loaded with technology. And the object was that they would come in and they would crash very lightly, so to speak. They crashed a little more heavily than they intended, and they killed the crew. But of course, in the case of the Pleiadians, that's no problem because they were able to resurrect themselves and, you might say, be reborn into another body created out of essence of what they had, crystals and so forth, which was all arranged in advance in case of an accident. The Pleiadians go on in a new body, which is an exact duplicate of the old, and the soul moves into the new body. In any case, they gave all this technology to Hitler. One wonders why he suddenly sprang up with so many new weapons, circular foil aircraft, and they were working on in the late 30s.
Just a second, let me. I mean, it's fascinating because what I've been digging into German hardware, and I've discovered dozens, maybe hundreds of machinery that came out of nowhere, that had absolutely no precursors, and for 50 years afterwards both superpowers have been trying to regurgitate them, and still half of them have never been tried later on. I mean, this Aurora space shuttle, the new Aurora craft, is a regurgitation of a design by Zanger Brent from 1929. I was suspecting for a very long time that there is some alien connection, some alien reason for this cornucopia of incredibly advanced weapons that the Germans built, and here is this connection.
I'll give another example. I'm sure many people who are aircraft buffs remember the belated B-58 Hustler supersonic bomber built in the United States in the late 50s. That aircraft, so far as I can determine, is an exact replica of what the Germans were ready to put in production in July of 1945. It was to be a long-range supersonic bomber which could fly nonstop from Germany to New York and drop the new super bomb, which they were in the process of developing, which they expected to be ready by Christmas of '45. A super bomb implosion type, the size of a pineapple, which could wipe out all of New York City, obviously beyond even a hydrogen bomb.
That's probably an
This was never. It was probably an antimatter bomb, and it was never built. Other earlier bombs were built by the Nazis. They did have atomic bombs, and they were of a very unique design also. How I happen to know this, I'm not going to go into, because I'm sure certain government agencies would be very curious, and of course they may already know how I know, because as Edward Cameron I learned these things, being as I was working at Los Alamos for 3 years, 44 to 47. But the Germans were way ahead of us. They had the atomic bomb, they never used it. Hitler was not the beast which some people made him out to be. I'm not saying he was an angel. But he did have some sense of proportion and reality. He refused to use the super weapon, except as a last resort, and he never did use it even in the last resort. And there were other things he refused to do. But they had these aircraft. They had jet aircraft long before the West knew what a jet engine was. They had flying jet fighters in 1940. Long before the British started to develop a jet engine in July 39. Okay, I'm corrected. They had a jet engine long before Mr. Whipple in Britain knew what a jet engine was. They probably captured one or had plans for it and tried to replicate it and couldn't. Because the British designs during World War II were very faulty. It was the Americans who finally made a jet engine work right after Germany collapsed. In fact,
as were the American designs for the nuclear bomb, and the rumors
right.
that the two Japanese bombs were actually captured German devices. That was.
I do believe they were. And Oppenheimer himself was heard to quote, and was quoted in certain German publications much later out of Canada, that the bombs we dropped on Japan were not built in the United States. We did make a genuine test in Trinity in 1945, and there were earlier tests. There were 3 earlier ones, one of which was successful, the Port Chicago explosion of July 17th, 1944, devastating, and 2 earlier duds, to my knowledge. The Trinity explosion in July, from that point, which was July 17th, I believe, in 1945, to the time when they dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, is rather hard to explain how from an engineering test they suddenly had full-blown bombs, casings, and everything all put together ready to drop on Japan in such a short period of time.
So back to the alien connection with the Germans and their, I mean, it was the aliens at the beginning. What happened at the end of the war?
What happened at the end of the war, actually before the end of the war, for whatever reasons, the Palladians who were supporting Hitler pulled out about 1941. And they said, we're not supporting you anymore. I only know this from indirect sources. The reasons I've never heard. But I heard another curious thing, which comes again through another CIA connection. I should say an ex-CIA connection. This person was talking, I will not name him either, to avoid embarrassment. This person was talking with some German prisoners of war after the war was over, and he learned something very interesting. That there were Greys, as we call them today, working with Hitler in the period of World War II in Nazi Germany. They came to Hitler and offered all kinds of additional technology, and Hitler was, of course, becoming a little desperate in 1941 even. He didn't think he was going to lose, but he was certainly accepting offers of help. And they offered him, again, all kinds of technology in addition to what he already had. And the price that they wanted was that for genetic experimentation they wanted some of the Aryan people. And Hitler told them there is no way you're going to touch them. He says, you can go take all the people you want out of the concentration camps. I don't give a damn about them. And that reputedly is what happened. The Greys came in, they gave the help that was promised, and then took large numbers of people out of the concentration camps. I hear rumors to the effect there were about 250,000 prisoners from the concentration camps they've never been able to account for because they just plain disappeared. So that was the help that he got, apparently, from two sources, if that's correct. I know it's correct on the Platons. I do not know for certain about the Greys. I have a single source information on that only. But in any case, regardless of the amount of help he had, he was overwhelmed by sheer numbers of troops, of planes, of tanks, of military, the militia from the world that united against him. And of course, we helped the Russians very heavily during the period when he was invading Russia. And the Russians turned eventually on Hitler. He came very close to winning in Russia, but the winter killed him. The winter was what ruined it.
Where were these Aryans and the other aliens that were working in the Montauk Project during the war? Weren't they helping the United States at that time?
To the best of my knowledge, no. I can only say to the best of my knowledge. There were some Greys and there were some reptilians on the planet at that time. But apparently the United States was not getting any alien help, either from the Philadelphia experiment during the period of that experiment, let's see, the 40s, or until after the war was over. A major change came in the United States government administration, in the military setup and administration, and in attitudes within government in 1947. There was a major turning point, because you then had the Joint Chiefs of Staff set up. You already had the Pentagon, but you didn't have the entire hierarchical structure, which we have now in the military. You had the way was made for the Secretary of the Air Force, who did not exist until 1952, I believe, when the separate Department of the Air Force was formed. But you had another change. All of the old-timers from the military and the Navy were mustered out, were given their discharges, and of course my demise came in 47 as Edward Cameron. I was no longer being covered by Hal Bowen Sr., who was the director of the Office of Naval Engineering and then later the first director of the Office of Naval Research. He was retired in 47. Another thing happened, and this is very significant. Up to that point, officers in the military, if they knew certain things too much about what they had learned in the process of the war, were perhaps brainwashed at various times. These techniques were used. But they were not done in, they were not murdered, they were not transferred into a new personality. This type of treatment, which starts with the advent of the CIA officially in 1947, actually it existed 2 years prior, it was formed of the captured chief, SS Chief Galen, and all of his crew, which were smuggled into the U.S. and became the backbone of the CIA and was not acknowledged as the CIA until Truman formally made a...
SS guys
right, many,
and became the backbone of the new KGB.
Right. But in any case, in 1947, the CIA formally came into existence, and that seemed to be the turning point for treatment of people who knew too much. Typically, the treatment thereafter was you just shoot them, or do them in. If you couldn't do that for certain reasons otherwise, then you totally brainwashed them and gave them a new personality. This type of treatment has persisted to this day. But up to that point, there did not seem to be a massive influx of aliens. And the point here is it was in 47 where they started coming in large numbers. All of your alien references for crashed UFOs, aliens were seen, start in 47, in July, in New Mexico at all. I won't go into the history because it's fairly well known. But then came the big invasion in 52, 53, due to the rift set up in space-time by the Philadelphia Phoenix Project lockup, and the large numbers came in, huge ships.
Which quite probably was engineered by the Luciferian Empire without ever telling the government what the Luciferian level of conspiracy.
It was totally engineered by the aliens from the 83 end, and without perhaps telling our government what they were trying to do, because soon as that event was closed in the sense that Duncan and myself returned to the Eldridge, then the orders went through people who didn't like what was going on and had sort of disconnected themselves from the Luciferian or whatever connections, set in motion the plan to destroy the Montauk operation, and it was destroyed the night of 12 August 1983. There were aliens in there, large numbers of them, They were largely the reptilian types, which you can equate, of course, to the Luciferian connection, if you wish. There were the Draconians, there were other Orions, there were other Orion types who were not reptilian. There were Syrians from Sirius A, who were the technical backup, as well as the Leverons. And you had others who were along there for the ride, like from Antares, who didn't do anything but observe, and they didn't seem to aid one side or the other. What their purpose was, I have no idea, but they were totally human in appearance, and they were very friendly. And there were the Greys. They were underfoot, and other such groups. But the alien connection only became large and sizable with all of it and went with it after 1954, when Eisenhower signed the treaty.
So we have here a change of alien races, different from these that were helping the Germans.
Yes, yes, there was a change.
Say that this is a conflict on a terrestrial level, global level, between the several superpowers, America, Germany, and Russia. On an alien level, between the Pleiadians helping the Germans and all of the others helping the United States. And finally, on a celestial level, between the Agarthians and the Arimanians.
Well, who were the Bafat supposedly lived under the pyramid that Billy Myers talked about? I can't figure where they fit into this.
Now, that's another story, but let me make one other point here. In 1953, Roosevelt, of course, was dead by then, and we had Eisenhower. So what happens? Eisenhower is again approached by the Pleiadians to make a deal and help humanity. They were much concerned about helping humanity after the war was over, which they said would happen and so forth. And Roosevelt said, Eisenhower in this case said, all right, what do you have in mind? He says, well, we'll help you with the spiritual development of mankind and give you other aid and assistance, but the first thing we insist on is the entire nuclear stockpile be destroyed. Well, of course, the military got into this for the conferences, and there was no mind at that time with the United States then appearing to be number one honcho on Earth with its nuclear stockpile and so forth. It was not about to destroy it and put ourselves into a untenable military position when the Russians already had nuclear weapons and it was expanding into other areas, and they knew it would happen. So the offer was turned down, the Pleiadians left, and of course the deal was made 1 year approximately later with the Greys. Not the little tiny ones, but apparently the larger ones who were the leaders, if you will, of the Grey movement, which may have included the large, tall 7-footers, but the information is that it was with the 4.5 or 5.5 foot Greys that the deal was made. The little ones are essentially clones. So they made this deal, and large numbers came in. Reptilians came in because they were the keepers of the Greys, and so forth and so on. The Pleiadians, in the meantime, didn't leave. They sort of snuck into the background. And I understand about a year later, approximately, after the 54 agreement, the Pleiadians came back again, and a partial deal was made with the U.S. government to provide them and build for them large bases underground in the Four Corners area of the United States. And the Pleiadians have remained in a very strange status because there are many groups of Pleiadians as there are many groups of Orions.
It's a federation of 400 planets, so
right.
You can imagine all the different factions and so on.
Right, there are Pleiadians.
Billy Myers' Semyaze group is basically a private group of about a dozen individuals that have an interest in our planet.
Right.
Association.
Yeah.
Right. There is another group that I know of that has a definite interest in this manner. And there's a group of Pleiadians who are accused of being turncoats who are working with the U.S. government and turn up in all of the underground torture mills as observers. I have one particular person who escaped from one of those who told that to me personally. And yet there are other Pleiadians who profess interest in the Earth, and of course then there's a main Pleiadian council which says non-interference policy is the rule. That's been reversed in the last year. But here you have this other side of it. You do have a good side. You do have those who seem to be willing to try and help humanity, but you have a free-for-all going on above us right now, and this is the real problem right at this moment.
In my in my studies of the Billy Myers contactee journals and the philosophies of the Pleiadians, I've realized that basically the whole philosophy of the Pleiadians can be summarized in a very brief sentence that they do not believe in the Trinity, that they believe in the creation, not in a creator, but in the whole universe that is equivalent to the creation, and that this creation has no personality. The personality business is the first paragraph of the Lucifer Manifesto, according to the Urantia book. This is the key point, the turning point, that the major divider line between the Luciferian and the Trinitarian empire from the viewpoint of philosophy. Is there a personality to the mainframe in the center of the whole universe, or is it a black box that keeps the universe running but without any personality? Anyway, the comparison of the Urantia book and the Chronicles of Billy Meyer is telling me that basically the Pleiadians share a philosophy that is Luciferian, in the sense that they do not believe in the personality of the Father. They are very advanced socially and spiritually and morally, at least the faction that contacts Billy Meyer, and way more advanced than the Little Greys, according to the party line revelations here. But still we see the same Luciferian approach, that it is the left hand and the right hand as if battling each other, but basically both of them serve the same purpose. You have the evil Little Greys, or these are the most evil of them, and the spiritually advanced Pleiadians, but they both serve the same Luciferian end. So regardless of whichever of these two races wins, it would be always and always a battle for a winner for the Luciferian forces. I mean, it's fascinating. No matter how often we talk about these topics, every time something new comes around. So, Chan, back to this Giza intelligence is under the Giza pyramid, and one of the persons that was, in your opinion, probably being channeled by Hitler himself. You mentioned something to that end yesterday.
I'm beginning to wonder about all of this. The Giza intelligence supposedly were descendants of the Lord Jehovah, and they have been with us all along down through the ages, living in various points under the earth.
What was the name of the person that was in?
There was a fellow called Kamagol II. Who was the latest leader in a long succession, whom supposedly the Pleiadians told Billy Myers that they took off the planet in 1975 and killed, so they were left without a leader.
They killed Kamagol?
Yes.
Why did they do that?
Because he was responsible for having put poisoned insects in the trees, trying to kill Billy Myers, and they considered this, the Pleiadians considered this interfering, so they took him off the planet and killed him, leaving him leaderless. I don't know what they look like, what their body types are, or anything else. I assume that they're human. Reinhold Schmidt had a run-in with him, and he was taken down there, and he said the way he described them, it looked like Scientology Sea Org members that you see on the streets of L.A., you know, white shirts, dark ties, and dark blue wrinkled trousers and so on. So I don't know. I'm trying to solve a mystery here myself. That's all I had to go on, really, and I was trying to...
that Kamagol was probably the entity, the very entity that was entering into Hitler during these mass...
I thought he was part of the negative group that was trying to influence the Third Reich in a negative way through these occultic spiritual means. But now I've got all this new data here I'm wrestling with, trying to figure out where it fits in.
Obviously the universe is way more complex than anything that we are talking here. We're probably barely scratching the surface of the overall involvement between material terrestrial, extraterrestrial alien races, and super material celestial levels of management and conspiracies. What would you say about, I don't know, what are your, how should I say, philosophical or spiritual feelings about the Third Reich? What I'm interested here is basically what is in this whole mishmash of aliens and secret terrestrial societies, what is the place of the Luciferian management structure. What are your feelings about this?
Well, it's a rather difficult question to answer. How do I feel about the possible connections with the Luciferian group? If you go back into the history of the United States, there's a man by the name of Stan Deyo who wrote a book now out of print entitled The Cosmic Conspiracy, detailing the early history of the United States and some of the symbology which was used by our founding fathers and tracing back where it really comes from. If you also look at not only Stan Deyo's data, but you also consider the Book of Urantia, which I believe you have quoted more than once, Vladimir, the Luciferian rebellion was a rebellion against authority, rigid, non-yielding authority where there was no freedom of thought or freedom of action. And this was the basis on which the United States was founded, against the authority, the unyielding authority of Europe, both financial and political. Or you might say in the case of Europe in those days, both financial and monarchical, because every nation in Europe at that time was a monarchy. The rebellion was against this rigid control and set up a free nation where people could think for themselves, do what they wanted within the constitutional guidelines, and there was guaranteed non-interference in various things, and of course no personal income taxes, and a number of other things which are totally unique from the European hierarchy as it existed. Now, looking at this, everything which constituted the United States Constitution and the Founding Fathers' ideas and beliefs and what we did in this country, the connections with the Masonic Order, which was heavily involved with the Founding Fathers, they founded a nation which was constitutionally free, and it would appear that the whole thing was based on Luciferian principles, which no religious person in their right mind, calling himself a Christian, wants to hear about.
That basically that the whole American nation was based on Luciferian principles?
Yes, the whole American nation was based on Luciferian principles, and I'm sure every Christian will jump down my throat for saying it. But this is the problem. Like Nazi Germany, while Hitler was guaranteeing the German people guns and butter and pulling them out of a terrible depression which had been fomented upon them by the bankers and the people who helped cause Germany to lose World War I when they had been winning it. Nevertheless, they did lose World War I in the final analysis, and of course the peace treaty that was forced upon them caused great trouble for the German people in the period of the 20s. And of course, historically, the Bolsheviks, the communists, were trying to overrule and override Germany and convert it to another Bolshevik nation, and Hitler came into power promising the people he would stop and destroy the Bolsheviks and restore the economy of Germany, which he did. To the German people, for the most part, he was a hero. To those who were in the banking business and opposed Hitler's concepts, of course, he was a terrible demagogue and a liar, a charlatan, and of course a beast. Hitler's primary purpose, from what I have been able to gather, and people have spent decades studying the history of what he did, was to throw out the Zionist banking systems, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, out of Germany and eventually out of Europe. Now, he made some very strange deals, of course, with certain people who backed him financially. He had to have financial backing. And some of it came out of New York from the very companies and groups which he professed to fight. And he never once, when he had the opportunity, assassinated a Rothschild. In fact, they were given very special treatment by the SS and sent back to their native lands, which is very curious for a man who was out supposedly to destroy all the Jews. It was also should be noted that he was a lifelong vegetarian, which might have led him into some of his psychic problems at a later date. But the whole thrust of the nation was to rid Europe of the control of these bankers who had literally destroyed most of Europe in terms of taking it over financially and putting everybody under their noose, under their heel, however you wish to express it, because the banking families of Europe owned all of Europe. They owned it lock, stock, and barrel, and Hitler said he was going to break this. So you have to look at it from a different perspective than what you may have been taught in the history books and by the popular press and those groups who champion the Jewish cause and say, of course, that Hitler was a terrible monster who was out to destroy all the Jews. He was not. Throughout his entire administration and throughout the war, Jewish people were maintained in his administration who were Semitic Jews, racial Jews, as distinct from the Khazar Jews. This is a point which is not easy to take, and many people do not like to look at, but it is a fact. Hitler's argument was with the establishment of his time, which he was fighting. He eventually lost because their power was far greater than his, and basically. And of course, at the same time, you had the internal psychic war going on between Hitler's group and the Aramanic group, which he was fighting on the physical level, and perhaps also at the spiritual level. There's one other point one should make. If Hitler was such a monster and such a terrible man, why is it that, number one, he never had a bodyguard anywhere he went in Germany, unlike most of our presidents since World War II, who have numbers of Secret Service bodyguards, and never go anywhere without them. Hitler went everywhere without a bodyguard, without any military guards of any kind. And furthermore, when he went to the various places, the children loved him. Now, don't ask me to explain how that is if he was such a beast, because children have a very high order sensitivity, which is destroyed usually at a later age, and they know when a person is good or evil. And the children used to go up to Hitler, and they loved him. So one has to take another look, another perspective as to what was meant and what the entire fight in Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, was really all about. Yes, there were many excesses and many things were wrong, but if you look at American history in terms of the wars, the Korean War, Vietnam War, and others, there were some terrible excesses on the part of our military. So, I mean, there was nothing peculiar to the Reich, the Third Reich, or the German regime at that time. All the military groups, when they become involved in a war, engage in excesses because it becomes psychologically an end in itself, and the war fever overtakes an individual's proper judgment, aside from orders that are given. I know of cases of people who became so lustful during the war they took joy in killing and went out and did just that for its own sake.
It always happens.
This happens in every nation with every military group.
I want to make a little remark here. The wars of gods and men. I mean, listening to all these stories, I mean, it's so fascinating on how many levels the universe is interwoven, and how flat and plain is the rendition of terrestrial events in the official media and press. Not much different from the rendition of the world happenings in the centrally controlled, tightly controlled Russian media during Brezhnev and Stalin times. It's not much different. What I would like to briefly comment here is that I've been fascinated very much with the Luciferian rebellion, because in my opinion this is the single most important turning point in our terrestrial history, at least in the last 250,000 years. I mean, according to your Rancher book, it happened 250,000 years ago. And things go slow in the Trinitarian Empire. A day on paradise is as 1,000 years here on earth. So basically, since Christ, only 2 days have passed on paradise. The rebellion is slowly unfolding. Earth is in from a Trinitarian perspective, in an isolated domain of space of this part of the galaxy. But the joining of the planetary chief, the planetary prince, the joining of Prince Caligastia to the Luciferian side, opened the planetary gates wide to the visits of many aliens that otherwise would have never been allowed on the planet by the Trinitarian management, if it was all working as it was supposed to do. I'm not passing judgment here on any side, because the universe is so way more complex and sophisticated than we can even imagine. I'm just trying to explain and to put the things into a proper perspective. And for 250,000 years, the Luciferian Empire has been attempting to outperform the Trinity technology-wise in transportation and communication and the creation of life. In the first two, I think they've been vastly successful, if what the Urantia book is telling us is true. In the last third, in the creation of life, we see all these heroic efforts here on our planet with all the underground government facilities, feverishly engaged in genetic engineering, shoulder to shoulder with the Nordics, from the Germans from the South Polar Colony, from the city of New Berlin, supposedly to have 2 million people population, with dozens of alien races, all involved under the orchestration of the Luciferian Empire. It's a major effort that goes on not only on our planet, but probably on all the other planets that are still under different stages of the Luciferian control. I've always had a suspicion that the tall, blonde, Nordic type beings that are observed in many little grey abduction scenarios, they may be the Germans from the South Polar Colony that are doing on a much grander scale the same experiments that they did in the 30s and 40s in the German concentration camps. Later on, they did them in broader level on the South Polar Colony, and here they are doing them on a continental level. Basically, all of the United States is involved in these experiments. Back to the Luciferian Empire and how this empire works on a political level to influence the political events of our country. We have a good collection of tapes that basically trace the relationship of Freemasonry to the Luciferian side of the equation, the relationship of the Order of the Illuminati to the same side, or smaller orders, university fraternities of the type of Skull and Bones, political associations like the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, or whole broad political movements on our planet. It is no secret to anyone that communism was created by the Illuminati. 1st of May, the International Communist Solidarity, Proletarian Worker Solidarity Day was the Illuminati was founded May 1st, 1776 in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt. Communism has been basically a new name for Illuminism, as have been Bolshevism and Italian fascism and President Bush's New World Orderism, if I may call it like this. I mean, these are just new shades of the, it is all the same Illuminism, which is basically Luciferianism. So, I mean, if I try to summarize this all, I mean, what happened with the best intention, the Promethean metaphor to bring the fire down to the oppressed and downtrodden earthlings, to steal the fire from the gods and to get punished, severely punished for that. I mean, these were incredibly good intentions, but looking at all these dealings with underground Frankensteinian factories, my whole archipelago of Frankensteinian factories operating full blast in the United States, all these mind control and horrific eradication experiments of policies against everybody who is against the government policy. Where's the empire of evil? Is it on the other side of the curtain, or is it on this side of the curtain, or is it just the Luciferian empire that is the evil empire? I'm not passing judgment, I'm just remembering this line of the Bible that says, well, you shall judge them by their fruit.
Pogo once summed it up. Pogo Possum, he said, we have met the enemy and he is us.
So, Chad, let's see how much we have left here.
Well, I'm curious, Al, what attracted the Germans to Antarctica? Is there a firm answer on that, or?
That's the topic of our next tape. We have 2 minutes left. Let's wrap it up with a grand closing.
What a great lead-in. Well, listen, I mean, consider how far we have come in ufology as a study over the years. In the beginning, there was a handful of us, and we were asking the question, is there a UFO? What are those things flying in the sky? And we've made quite a bit of progress. Now we're up to the point of where we're discussing alien races, their technology, their women,
celestial
their good
structures.
I mean, that's quite an accomplishment.
So, well,
We have nothing in our hands to play with.
we will encourage all of our viewers to duplicate these tapes, to pirate these tapes as much as possible, because this is how the word is spread around. Actually, we will make it a condition for the usage of these tapes that if the tape is seen by someone, then it has to be duplicated and sent to at least one of his friends, to be pirated and sent to at least one of his friends. We have a long list of tapes available on the tapes that we did interviews with Al Bielek on the Philadelphia teleportation experiment and the Phoenix time tunnel experiment as last